Ready?
I don't want to Google. I don't have a Google account. No.
All right.
But I can view it.
Everybody back? Hey, see you on vacation.
Okay,
Relax. Everybody back? Yep, let's start it off. All right, everybody. We have two great speeches lined up. I know I've seen them both. Our first speaker today is Brette Esterbrooks, and he's going to be talking about securing the ASP.NET Web API. Welcome, Brette.
Thank you, Vince. Good morning, fellow Tech Masters and returning Tech Masters and new member. Today I'm going to be talking with you all about security in the ASP.NET Web API. We're going to start off with a little bit of a review of some of the features that this framework gives us, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what it offers in terms of a security model, and more importantly, what it doesn't offer. Now, for the last year or so, both in project work and presentations, I've been dealing a lot with this particular framework, and I think my opinion of it is, in terms of flexibility and feature set, it's one of the best that the .NET Stack has ever offered. We have a wonderful routing subsystem. Routing is important for service developers because it allows us to organize our endpoints in such a way that clients can consume them. We get content negotiation out of the box. As we continue to develop services for more and more clients, cell phones, tablets, PCs, it's important that we can kind of manage any type of data format that our clients want. Out of the box, we get JSON and XML, and we also have the extension points that allow us to plug in our own media types if we want to. We get model binding and its counterpart, model validation. Now, these two things work in concert to give us a whole bunch of really interesting features. Model binding on one side takes in the HTTP request, converts it into our CLR objects, so within our actions, we don't have to interrogate the request directly. On the other side, we have validation that runs all of our validation rules and our business logic on the models to ensure that only valid requests are being processed. Last but definitely not least, built to be extremely testable from the ground up, from front to back. Every component of this framework is testable, and that's a really, really great thing. Now, if you take all of these things and you add it with the fact that it's built on top of MVC, me as a software developer, and probably anyone who's worked with it, is pretty happy, right? It's pretty great framework. However, as they say, it is not all rainbows and unicorns. In fact, if you spend any time with this framework at all, you'll find yourself asking a question when you create an API. How do I secure this thing? How do I make this secure? Probably do what I did, maybe go to Google, look at some of the Microsoft documentation, and soon enough you'll come to the same conclusion I did. That this framework that gives us so much support, so many things we love, model binding, all the stuff from MVC, when it comes to security, the web API is pretty much silent. In fact, it's worse than silent. If you read some of the documentation, you'll hear things and you'll see things that says, well, authentication is really part of the hosting environment. In other words, not my problem, right? But unfortunately for us, it is our problem. We have to write secure services. Our clients want public-facing, internal-facing, secure services. And without support directly in the API, we're kind of left on our own. Now, the phrase that you hear is it's the responsibility of the host. Maybe not all is lost. If you look at it from that perspective, in a Windows environment, in a .NET environment, the most logical host is probably IIS, right? So if you look at that, you don't have to host your APIs in IIS, but if you decide to, you do get a few options. You get basic authentication. Now, basic authentication is a pretty compelling option because it's part of the HTTP standard, and it's really pretty simple. But unfortunately, the IIS implementation relies on NTLM authentication, which means that any user that wants to be authenticated to use your service needs to have an existing Windows account. Now, from a public API perspective, that doesn't make any sense. You're not going to create Windows accounts for every one of the users that want to use your services. So HTTP standards, it's a great thing, but unfortunately the IIS implementation isn't going to hold up to all the use cases we need to support. The next thing you'll hear about is Windows integrated authentication. Now this is awesome for internal things because users who are logged into Windows can just access your APIs. You can leverage some of your existing infrastructure, Active Directory, your domain controller, But again, once you go public, same problem, right? You're not going to make every user of your service part of your domain. The last thing, and probably the most preponderant of the three options you get, is form-based authentication. Now, if you create a new MVC site and you're using the Web API, this is what you get by default. And it works really, really great when you're in the context of a website. However, there's a flaw with this particular implementation, and that is what it relies on to exchange security information. And that is, of course, cookies. Cookies are native to the web, but our APIs need to service a whole bunch of other clients, not just web clients, right? We have phones, we may have iOS, maybe it's Windows Phone. So relying on cookies isn't an option either. So of the three options we get from IIS, which is really all we get from the Web API's perspective, we have forms-based authentication. It's not really going to work. We have basic authentication. Not really going to work. And we have integrated Windows authentication, which really isn't going to work when we're talking about public-facing APIs. So what do? Well, in the next series of presentations I'm going to show you some things that we can do to actually do basic authentication in a way that takes NTLM out of the picture. So we can actually use it for public-facing sites. And with all of the wonderful extension points, and this goes to some of the great stuff about the API, there's hooks everywhere in the framework to manage this stuff. We'll see, through several code examples that I'll give, easy ways that we can implement flexible security models for both internal and public-facing sites, and things that we can do to basically manage any type of security demand we have. And once you see these extension points and how simple it is, you'll be back to happy. It takes a little bit to get there. But once you see what's available and how possible it is, you start to then forgive the framework for what it decided to leave out. And with that,